Let's be honest about what is happening in America. There are cities right now where white people are packing up and heading for the hills. And no, it is not because of the weather. It is 2026, but the migration patterns look exactly like the 1960s. They are not leaving because of taxes. They are not leaving because of traffic. They are leaving because the black population got a little too comfortable for their taste. We are diving into the top 5 cities that white people are running away from. These are the places where they say it just is not the same anymore. And they are right. The neighborhood barbecues got more flavor, they got more melanin, and they got a whole lot more culture. To us, that feels like home. To them, that feels like a threat. So they label these cities as unsafe. They call them ghetto, and they take their tax dollars to the suburbs. It is a quiet evacuation, but the numbers scream loud and clear, whether it is denial, discomfort, or just old-fashioned prejudice. These are the cities that scared off the white folks, and we are going to break down exactly why. Hit that like button if you are ready for the truth, subscribe if you want more real talk, and tell me in the comments if you have seen this happen in your city. Here are the top 5 cities that became too black for white Americans. Number 5, Chicago, Illinois. We start our countdown in the Windy City, Chicago, Illinois. This city did not just separate people by accident, it practically turned segregation into an Olympic sport. If you want to see where white flight got a master's degree in denial, just take a walk through neighborhoods like Englewood, or take a drive through North Lawndale. These neighborhoods did not lose white residents over a long period of time. They were evacuated. It was like someone yelled diversity over a loudspeaker, and suddenly everyone vanished into thin air. Now, let us be clear about something. Chicago is known for a lot of great things. It has deep dish pizza. It has a skyline that looks amazing on a postcard, but it is also one of the most deeply divided cities in America, not decades ago. Right now, in 2026, nowhere is that divide more obvious than when you cross the line. You go from the north side to the south side or the west side. This is where the black population lives. And this is where the money mysteriously vanishes. Investment disappears. Safety disappears. And opportunity disappears. It happens just like magic. White residents used to live in places like Englewood. But as soon as black families moved in, the panic button got slammed. Real estate agents scared people into selling their homes cheap. Banks refused to lend money to the new black residents. And today, the numbers tell the story. Englewood is over 90% black. North Lawndale is about 85% black. And the white population mostly left behind parking tickets and unpaid bills. But here is the wild part about all of this. The reputation of these neighborhoods has become more powerful than the reality. The media loves to paint these areas as danger zones. They rarely talk about the families who have lived there for generations. They do not talk about the grandmothers watching out for the kids on the porch. They do not talk about the people trying to build something from nothing. Ever notice how violence in white suburbs is called a tragedy, but in black neighborhoods it is just expected? That is the bias of Chicago showing its true colors. We have to ask a real question here. Is the South Side really that scary? Or is it just too black for the comfort of folks who would rather pretend it does not exist? Is the fear based on facts? Or is it based on the same tired story that keeps real estate agents whispering? It keeps Uber drivers checking their locks when they cross a certain street. It keeps the city divided into 2 different worlds. When you look at the money, it tells the whole story. Reports show that the city loses billions of dollars every year just because of this separation. When you devalue black homes, you destroy black wealth. It is not that the people there do not work hard. It is that their hard work is worth less in the eyes of the system. The grocery stores leave. The banks close their branches. The schools get less money for books and repairs. And then people from the outside look in and say the community is failing. They do not see that the support system was removed on purpose. It is like taking the wheels off a car and blaming the driver for not moving. Chicago stands at number 5 because it shows us exactly how this works. It is a tale of 2 cities. One is shiny and rich and mostly white. The other is struggling and fighting and mostly black. And the only thing separating them is a line on a map and a whole lot of history that people want to forget. But the people on the South Side have not forgotten. They are still there, they are still building, and they are still waiting for the rest of the city to acknowledge the debt that is owed. Number 4. Atlanta, Georgia. Next up is the city they call the Black Mecca, Atlanta, Georgia. Atlanta did not just get too black, it got proudly black, it got unapologetically black, and it got thrivingly black. While that is something to celebrate for many people, apparently not everyone got the invite to the cookout, as Atlanta became the center of black culture in the South. A whole lot of white residents quietly turned their attention north. They looked toward the suburbs, places like Alpharetta, places like Marietta. Yes, places with perfectly cut lawns and very few surprises. Let us keep it real for a second. Atlanta is nearly 50% black inside the city limits. It has an economy powered by black entrepreneurs. It has black entertainers shaping global culture. It has black academics. And it has black activists. It is a city where you can find a black mayor. You can find black CEOs running major companies. And you can find black-owned brunch spots with lines around the block. But as black political power grew in the city, so did the white migration out of the center. Do you think that is a coincidence? Or is that nervous energy we are sensing? Here's a fun number for you to think about. In the 1970s, white people made up over 60% of the population in Atlanta. Today, they are down to less than 40%. And that number is still slipping down. Meanwhile, the metro suburbs have boomed, especially those quiet neighborhoods where folks say things like, "We moved for the schools," which often translates to, "We were not ready for that kind of diversity." But now we see something new happening in 2026. It is not just about moving away, it is about taking the tax money with them. We have seen wealthy white areas trying to break away from the city. They want to form their own cities. They call it cityhood, but critics call it resource hoarding. They want to build a wall around their money. They want to make sure their taxes only go to their streets, and their parks, and their police. They do not want to share with the rest of Atlanta. They say it is about local control. But it looks a lot like they are running away from their neighbors. Think about the Buckhead City movement. It was the ultimate example of this, trying to carve out the wealthiest part of the city just to keep the tax dollars from flowing south. It is like inviting someone to dinner and then putting a padlock on the fridge. Don't get it twisted though, Atlanta is no utopia. The cost of living is climbing high, traffic is a nightmare, and gentrification is creeping in. But what makes white flight here fascinating is that it is not just about fear, it is about losing control in a city where black culture is the main culture. Some folks feel like outsiders in a place they used to claim. So here's the question we need to answer. Why do people run from a city that is booming economically? Why run from a place that is culturally vibrant? Why run from a place rich with opportunity? Unless what they are really running from is the loss of a certain comfort zone. They are running because they are no longer the main character in the story of Atlanta. The script has flipped. And instead of staying to be part of a diverse cast, they would rather go start their own show somewhere else. Atlanta at number 4 teaches us a powerful lesson. Even when you have political power, even when you have cultural influence, the fight for economic fairness never really ends, because money has a way of moving to where it feels most comfortable, and for a long time in America, that comfort zone has been white. They built highways to make sure they could work in the city but sleep far away from it. They built barriers that are made of zoning laws instead of bricks, but Atlanta keeps rising, because the culture here is not something you can just pack up and move. Number 3, Baltimore, Maryland. Now we move to a city that people love to talk about, but rarely understand. Baltimore, Maryland. Baltimore did not just become too black for some white folks. It became the city they brag about leaving. You have heard it before. Someone says, "I work in Baltimore, but I live in the county, not in the state." Translation, I want the paycheck, but I do not want the diversity. And for decades now, white flight from Baltimore has not been a quiet trend. It is practically a family tradition. Baltimore is about 60% black, and that did not happen overnight. Since the 1960s, white residents have slowly retreated, and sometimes not so slowly. They moved to the surrounding counties. These are the places where they say it is safer. They say the schools are better, and they say it just feels more like home. But let us not pretend that these talking points do not come with a hidden meaning. It is coded language. It comes with a sprinkle of generational bias. Let us look at the numbers. Between 1950 and 2026, Baltimore lost hundreds of thousands of white residents, a drop so steep it could make your head spin. Meanwhile, the city's black population rose, neighborhoods changed, and the culture evolved into something powerful, something complex, and to some people, something that was just too much. You ever notice how the same neighborhoods that gave us legends like Thurgood Marshall also get labeled as war zones on the news? Baltimore is not just stereotyped. It is weaponized. It is used as an example of what happens when a city goes black. But let us be honest here. Is the problem the people, or is the fact that funding left the moment black families moved in? Is it that respect left the moment black families moved in? Sociologists have a name for the map of Baltimore. They call it the black butterfly and the white L. The white L is the strip down the middle where the money goes, where the tourists go, where the investment flows like water. The black butterfly is the wings on the east and west sides. That is where the people live, and that is where the neglect happens. It is geographic apartheid, and here is where it gets real. Because while white families fled to the suburbs, black Baltimore built something real. They built businesses, they built culture, they built activism, and they built an identity that is tough as nails. They preserved those famous row houses. They created art that the world admires, and they kept the soul of the city alive, even as outsiders drive in for crab cakes and sports games, but drive out before the sun sets. They treat the city like a playground, but they do not want to help clean it up. They see the struggles, but they do not see the system that created them. They see the empty houses, but they do not see the banks that refuse to give loans to fix them up. They see the anger, but they do not see the neglect that caused it. Baltimore stands at number 3 because it is a survivor. It has survived abandonment. It has survived bad press, and it has survived being the punching bag for national politics. Do people avoid Baltimore because of crime? Or do they avoid it because the city does not mirror the image they are comfortable with? Maybe they avoid it because looking at Baltimore forces them to look at what happens when you turn your back on a community. It forces them to see the consequences of leaving, and that is a reflection that not everyone wants to see in the mirror. So they look away, they move away, and they blame the butterfly for not being able to fly with clipped wings. Number 2, Jackson, Mississippi. Now we arrive at a place that will shock you. Jackson, Mississippi. Here is the number you need to know. Jackson is over 80% black, and for some white residents, that statistic alone was the final moment to leave. This is the state capital. It is a city that should be the crown jewel of Mississippi. But instead, it has been slowly abandoned. It was abandoned by the very people who once ran it, the people who lived in it, and let us be honest, the people who owned it. Let us not sugarcoat this situation. White flight here isn't just a trend, it is a legacy since the civil rights era. White families have been slipping out the side door. They left behind not just homes, but they left behind schools, they left behind tax dollars, and they left behind accountability. These days, you will find them sipping sweet tea in nearby towns. They enjoy freshly paved roads, while Jackson's pipes freeze, while Jackson's pipes burst, and while metaphor after metaphor leaks all over the city. So what really happened here? Jackson did not implode on its own, it just got too black. It got too bold. And it got too inconvenient for those who preferred their diversity limited to a magazine cover. When black leadership took over the mayor's office, when they took over the school board, and when they took over the city council. Instead of celebrating progress, many white residents hit the highway like the city was on fire. Let us look at the facts. In 1980, Jackson was almost half white. By 2026, that number has dropped to a tiny fraction. That is not slow migration, that is a sprint. And the result of that sprint is clear. A city full of vibrant culture left to fend for itself. A city full of powerful history left without funds. A city full of passionate residents left with bills they cannot pay alone. Underfunded schools are the norm. Deteriorating infrastructure is everywhere. And a national narrative acts like Jackson is broken, when the truth is it was left behind. Think about the water crisis. Think about how hard it is to get clean water in a major American city. That did not happen by accident. That happened because the money to fix the pipes left with the people who moved away, and the state government does not seem in a hurry to help. They point fingers at the local leaders. They blame the victims for the disaster, but they hold the purse strings. It feels like a punishment. It feels like the state is saying, you wanted to run the city, so figure it out. But they took the checkbook with them. So here is the question we have to ask. Was Jackson really too dysfunctional for white residents to stay, or was it just too black for them to feel in charge? Did they leave because things were falling apart? Or did things fall apart because they left? Jackson stands at number 2 because it is the clearest example of punishment. It shows us that representation matters, but representation without resources is a trap. It is a setup for failure, and it shows us that some people would rather see a city fail than see it succeed under black leadership. The tragedy of Jackson is not incompetence. The tragedy is abandonment, and the refusal to see the humanity in the people who stayed behind to fight for their home. Number 1, Detroit, Michigan. And finally, we reach the top of the list. Detroit, Michigan. Detroit did not just make cars, it made history as the ultimate case study in white flight. This is ground zero for everything we have been talking about. This is a city that went from being mostly white in the 1950s to being over 75% black today. And no, that was not because white folks suddenly developed a love for the rural life. It was because the city got too black for their comfort, and they hit the gas pedal out of there. Faster than a muscle car on a drag strip, let us talk about the facts. As black families moved in during the Great Migration, they were looking for good jobs in the auto industry. They were looking for a piece of the American dream. White residents responded with panic. They drew lines on maps where black people could not live. They sold their houses in a rush, and eventually they moved out in masses. By the time the uprising of 1967 shook the city, white families had already started flooding into the suburbs. They moved to places like Warren and Livonia, like there was a sale on safety and silence. But here is the irony of Detroit. Detroit did not crumble because it got black. It crumbled because white investment left, corporate dollars left, and political attention left. They all left the minute white residents did. It was disinvestment by design. It was economic sabotage wearing a suit and tie. You ever wonder how a major US city files for bankruptcy while its suburbs flourish? That is not bad luck. That is a blueprint. That is how the system was designed to work. Today in 2026, Detroit is a city of survival. Black-owned businesses are popping up everywhere. The culture is thriving and alive, and people who stayed are rebuilding what was torn down. But the headlines still frame it as a city of ruin. Why is that? Because in the eyes of some people, a black-led recovery does not count. They look at the shiny new downtown area, and they say Detroit is back. But who owns downtown now? Who is making money there? It is mostly wealthy investors who came back when prices were low. Meanwhile, the neighborhoods where black grandmothers lived for 50 years still have broken streetlights. They call it a comeback, but we call it a takeover. So here is the final question of this countdown. Was Detroit's downfall really about the industry collapsing, or was that just the cover story? Was it a cover story for an exit that started the moment integration knocked on the door? Detroit is number 1 because it is the blueprint. It shows the whole cycle, from panic to flight, from flight to neglect, from neglect to blame, and now from blame to taking it back when it is profitable again. It is a story of resilience against all odds. The people of Detroit refused to let their city die. Even when the rest of the country wrote an obituary, they kept the heartbeat going. And that is something that no amount of money can buy, and no amount of white flight can take away. This is the reality of the quiet migration. It changes maps, it changes economies, but it cannot erase the spirit of the people who stay, because home is not just where the money is. Home is where the heart is, and the heart of these cities is still beating strong. So what is the real lesson here? From Chicago to Detroit, white flight is not just about migration, it is an economic weapon. When a city becomes too black, the rules change. The money stops flowing, and the blame game begins. But do not look at these cities with pity. Look at them as crime scenes of an economic mystery. If you are thinking about moving, look deeper than the culture. Look at the tax base. Look at who controls the resources, because true freedom is having the resources to live a good life. They can leave. They can take their money, but we are not going anywhere. The question is, how do we rebuild when they no longer hold the wallet? If you found value in this truth, share it. Subscribe for more bold breakdowns. Stay safe, stay awake, and keep building.